Okay, I'm just doing this to show Jack what OS I've got on this computer. And as you can see here, it's got version 10.8.2, which is like a Snowline, I think. It's the newest one, I'll put it that way. And I'll show you all what I used to make the screen capture video. Snaps Pro X. And I'm not for sure what version it is because there's no way to know because it doesn't have anything in the task manager for it or whatever it's called. See, because I'm using it right now, but I come over here to force quit and it doesn't show up in my list of running programs. So I don't know how that works, but it does. Anyway, I took a screen capture off of Jack's video this weekend by EVTV, and I cut it down to only include the explanation of the lithium-ion battery. The original video was about twice as long as it is, but anyway.
So let's take a look at me trying to play Weather Channel.
Professor Rickard.
Weather Channel with a lithium diagram on the wall. And me strutting back and forth in front of it, chanting nonsense.
I know.
This is, it's got to be good.
Yeah.
Let's take a look. In a technological video tour de force, today I am going to attempt to simulate the hippy-dippy weatherman. You know, I had a burgeoning career, could have been huge on the Weather Channel. Problem was, at a tender age, I had a rotator cuff injury. I could do Texas okay, but when it came up here to the Dakotas, I was pretty much out of the game, so they let me go. But I am going to try to use this green chroma key wall in addition to making my feet disappear. We are going to put up a diagram that I have stolen and then remade of a lithium-ion battery diagram. I have been threatening to do this. We introduced the anode last week in a discussion of what's happening when we're fast charging. There are lies, damn lies, and statistics in attempting to explain things that I understand poorly and that the absolute experts in the field change how they understand it weekly. And I do mean weekly. I probably do 6 hours of reading of scientific papers a week on lithium battery cells, most of which refute the things that I read in the previous week. And so the lithium battery, our reach kind of exceeds our grasp on what really happens in there. Historically, a fascinating guy named Dr. James Goodenough, working with Sony in 1990, developed a lithium cell using lithium cobalt and the first graphite or carbon anode. In 1996, an assistant of his, whose name doesn't precisely escape me, I just can't pronounce it, Ashad Paksaye, at the University of Texas, Austin. Forgive me, it's something like that. Proposed the use of what he called polyanions as a battery, and ultimately lithium iron phosphate, which turns out to be a very, I think, very very good battery chemistry, and the one that we favor today, and that I'll talk about today. This is done somewhat experimentally. They have theories, and they mix mixtures of materials, and then they test them. And if they test well, they can be further developed and refined into an ever better battery. What actually happens in the battery is not exactly as known as you think. They have theories, and they continue to refine those. Anode reality. I last week described some very pretty AA-BB pairs of graphene sheets and a very orderly arrangement of lithium ions diffusing in between those sheets in a certain order and in a certain way. The reality of anodes in battery manufacture is they're mostly coconut shell. And they take coconut shell and they burn it, and then they put it through a very slow centrifuge, a rolling furnace, and I suppose calcify it or calcate it. They remove all the moisture from it, and so it becomes very fine powder, and it's carbon in a fairly pure form. But the concept of carbon C6 covers a multitude of sins. Among them is graphene and graphite, but also any number of other carbon structures alloyed with any number of impurities. And so those neat crystalline structures are more of a jumble, and in very small particles that can be any number of things. And so that's the reality of the very pretty carbon crystalline structure that I described last week. The cathode is somewhat more complex, and let me play weatherman here. Normally they have a little monitor off to the side where they can look at that and see what they're doing. I'm guessing, and so you have to kind of give me a little slack here. Our cathode has a aluminum metal connector over here, and then a very thin layer of material. And that material consists of a binder, some glue, essentially, that attaches the material to the aluminum current collector, and in our case, lithium iron phosphate. Iron phosphate or ferric phosphate is actually fertilizer. It's very inexpensive and very common. It consists of iron in a structure sharing covalently, that term from last week, sharing electrons with 6 oxygen atoms, and that puts it in what a much more complex crystal lattice than the carbon hexagon. It's actually a orthorhombic tetrahedron, which is generically referred to as an olivine structure. Pictures multifaceted pyramids. And the 6 oxygen atoms that are covalent with the iron atom are also covalent with a phosphorus atom. And so we get very complicated, some other little tetrahedrons that are on the corners of the iron oxide tetrahedron. And so we have a very lumpy, angular crystal lattice. And the lithium would have to normally zigzag through that to find spots analogous to that very pretty hourglass looking situation in the anode. There's a problem. Lithium iron phosphate's an insulator, it's a very poor conductor. And so we can't get electrons to really flow from our aluminum current collector out into this material, and so we can't establish charges and take away charges to attract or repel lithium ions. And that refers to the conductivity and the diffusion in the cathode. And so to increase the conductivity, what we do in the cathode is to mix that with carbon, which again is a good conductor along certain planes. And so the in the anode, our battery is really based on a lithiated carbon anode, and that is a lithium intercalated anode is what makes the battery. We can't mix lithium with carbon and paste it on the copper and do any good with it. It just doesn't work. And so we can combine lithium readily with ferric phosphate or iron phosphate. And so they combine lithium, the metal, with iron phosphate and a binder and some carbon, and they tumble all that very good and glue it to our aluminum current collector, and we have a cathode. Now, we still have this diffusion problem. If we make that mixture very thin, we can have good conduction and good intercalation into it, and so we can make a lot of power quickly. But because we don't have very much material, we can't store very much energy. If we make it thicker, we can store more energy. We can intercalate more lithium into that cathode material. But now we have diffusion and conduction problems getting through it and essentially communicating charges to the aluminum current collector. So that's one of the trade-offs. You've all heard us talk about A123 batteries and remarkable performance. What they did was shrink the lithium iron phosphate to some very tiny nano size. As you know, Richard likes nanos. So these are very small pellets of lithium cathode material, lithium iron oxide, phosphate, and they coat those little pellets with carbon. And so that puts the thing, you have to go through the carbon to get to that, which is no problem because the carbon is, of course, permeable to lithium ions, but it's also a good conductor. And then we mix that with a binder and put it on the thing. There's also a lot of magic sauce out there. Every battery manufacturer has various dopants that they think will increase conductivity of lithium iron phosphate. Yttrium is one, vanadium, molybdenum, cerium, and so everybody has their magic sauce that they will not tell you what it is they put in there, but it's some rare earth element, metal usually, that they put in the lithium iron phosphate to make it more conductive. As I said, we can mix lithium with iron phosphate fairly readily, and we can mechanically mix this and put it with the binder and glue it onto the aluminum anode. Of course, the battery works on lithium ion. And so that takes us to our first charge, and it's called the formative charge. It could be a series of them. They're done quite slowly, and I'll explain why in a moment. And what we do, if you can see in the circuit here, we go from the aluminum, we take electrons, and with a power supply, pump them all the way over here, and put them on our copper current collector. And they go out into our carbon and establish essentially a negative charge. And as you know, that static charge is capacitors. We have then set up a difference in potential between the copper collector and the aluminum collector, essentially making the aluminum more positive and the copper more negative, and that sets up a static field across that cell. We've talked about iron and phosphate and oxygen and lithium. And of those, lithium has the poorest power to retain its electron. It has 2 electrons and 3 protons in the nucleus, and 2 electrons in a low orbit, and 1 in a second energy band or valence band. And that electron is very easily detached, and that's why lithium is so reactive. It will react with anything. It's probably the 3rd element of the universe after hydrogen and helium, and we almost never find it in a pure state, like hydrogen, which also readily combines with things. It gives up that electron so easily. It's so light and so tiny, like hydrogen, that a piece of lithium metal will float on water. It has essentially the density of pine wood, dry pine wood. But if you did float it on water, it would react with the water and actually cause a fire. It might explode. It just very quickly gives up that electron to the hydrogen and oxygen in the water, forming new compounds. And so when we set up this charge, we're basically causing the electrons in the lithium metal, and it is as lithium metal initially, comes off of the lithium atom and out into the current collector, and we have a lithium ion. And lithium ions have a positive charge because they have 2 electrons and 3 protons at that point. And they want to distance themselves from each other, as we said last week in the anode. So there's some pressure at that point to diffuse out of the lithium iron phosphate and into our electrolyte, simply because the lithium ions want to put distance between themselves. They'll expand whatever room they have in doing that, and a kind of uniform pressure distribution. But there's another force acting on them, and that is that this is the positive side, and this is the negative side, and we have an electrostatic field between those 2. And that tends to accelerate the lithium ions in this direction. And we want to go from the lithium iron phosphate, and we want to go over here to the anode side and intercalate with the through charge transference, as I described last week, with the electrons that are flowing in the free flow of electrons along the graphene plane, which takes on a negative charge, which attracts that positive charge and holds that in that cage. There's no covalent bonding here. This is strictly a matter of, by charge, it's attracted to be in this position between 2 layers and inside of that hexagon by charge transference. Here's the problem. We have to have an electrolyte to get there from here. In the middle of the battery, we have a separator made out of polyethylene or polypropylene with holes in it. And it's actually, where we say we have electrolyte on both sides of it, it's actually a little bit absorbent and absorbs the electrolyte. And so we have a wet napkin made out of plastic trash bag that has absorbed a mixture. The essential function of it is a lithium salt called lithium hexafluorophosphate, LiPF6, in a non-aqueous solution. And that is, there is no water in it. We can't allow any water to get in it. It has to be free of H2O. And we use essentially a variety of ether carbonates. DMC is a dimethyl carbonate, EC is ethylene carbonate, DEC is diethylene carbonate. There's a PVC, which is actually not turned out very good, a poly vinyl carbonate, and a couple of others. But that's usually some aspect of these what are called inorganic solvents, but it's alcohol, methanol and alcohol primarily, but with no water. And so that's the function. In the formative charge of the battery only, not only, but primarily in the formative charge of the battery, our lithium ion is trekking across here, and it reacts with these solvents, primarily, in some bad ways. And that causes the solvents to precipitate some solid matter, some precipitates that come out of the solution and become solids. And they form a thin skin, a kind of a vinyl covering or a rubber coating on our carbon anode. And we call this the solid electrolyte interphase layer. And it's a problem and a solution both at the same time. And we do this fairly slowly, so a few lithium ions are going across, reacting with the solvents and forming this SEI layer. The SEI layer then does a couple of good things. We build up lithium ions in the anode in fairly large numbers. Lithium ions, as we've established, react with the solvents in the electrolyte. If we had a bunch of them in the carbon suddenly exposed to our electrolyte, they would have a very thermal reaction. And so this SEI layer kind of seals off our lithium ions in the carbon anode and keeps the rest of the solvents from reaching them and causing a reaction. And so it's like a sealant. The process of intercalation of lithium ions into the carbon causes the lattice to expand mechanically, and it fractures in some cases. Intercalation, it expands. Deintercalation, it shrinks back, and this wears out our carbon, and it breaks into pieces. The SEI layer kind of functions to hold that wall of crumbling bricks together in place and extends the life of the battery. However, there is a diffusion delay between getting the lithium ions through the SEI layer, which they can penetrate. Lithium ions are very small, much smaller than any of the atoms and molecules in the electrolyte. And so they can diffuse through it, but it delays it, and it actually causes a little bit of a voltage drop. That voltage drop, as we increase our current, for example, in fast charging, if it reaches a certain point, it will cause a rupture of that SEI layer and a fairly catastrophic runaway situation then. And so each time we move lithium ions through here, it thickens this SEI layer. The initial ones is the big laydown of the solids. After that, it slows down quite a bit. But that's part of the aging of the battery and the increase in impedance, or as so many of you insist on discussing it as internal resistance, but it is a diffusion delay and a little bit of a drop there in the battery that thickens and increases with age and which causes the battery to age more. So in the formative stage, we're taking lithium metal, ionizing it, converting it into a cation by removing the electron and bringing it around and pumping it out onto the anode side. And because of the electrostatic field and the diffusion of the repulsion of the positive cations to each other, we migrate across the battery and intercalate into the anode, and that really establishes our battery. From there on, we won't see lithium metal in any good sense ever again. When we discharge, those electrons flow around the circuit, show up over here, and the lithium ions are gradually released. They penetrate the SEI barrier, they penetrate our separator, and they go over back to the lithium iron phosphate, but at this point, they're not going to be get their electron back. They're going to be attracted by the charge in the graphite and the conductors and so forth, and they're going to intercalate into the lithium iron phosphate, or into the iron phosphate matrix, much as they do in the carbon side. And so this formative charge is very important. This is the point where we create lithium ions, and it's the point where we create the solid electrolyte interphase layer. And once we have our anode fully lithiated, and we have removed all the lithium from the or most of the lithium from the phosphate cell, we're said to be fully charged. When we discharge the battery, we hook through a load, and there's just a huge difference in potential here. We have a lot of negative charge built up, not on the plate, the copper plate like a capacitor. Yes, they do build up there. And you do have kind of a capacitive effect, but that wouldn't provide us very much energy. Much more so, we have this fuzzy area, this thick charcoal wall with billions of lithium ions intercalated into that structure. And it gives the entire, the electrons hold the lithium ions in place. The lithium ions hold the electrons in place. And they have no place to go anyway because we pump them in here and then disconnect it. It's an open circuit. The electrons can't go anywhere. The battery is storing that charge. On this side, we have taken electrons out of the aluminum. And just like a capacitor, we have that effect. But we have also removed electrons from the lithium that was in the lithium iron phosphate. And with every electron removed, that becomes more positive. When we send it around to the other side, this becomes more negative, and we wind up with a difference in potential of about 3.38 volts. And that's the way it is, and that's where it's at. And the reason we can do a lot of current or run this for a long time is because there's lots of lithium ions embedded in our charcoal over here, our coconut shells, and there is a lot of lithium missing from our original mixture of fertilizer, ferric phosphate. And with an open circuit, that's the way it stands, 3.35 volts. And if we connect a load between the two of them, we can reverse the process. The negative will tend to flow toward the positive and going through our load to work. When we decrease the charge here, we have essentially decreased its ability to hold all those lithium ions in position, and they begin to escape. They migrate through the SEI layer, and they migrate through the separator, which is got very small holes in it. It keeps the two plates from actually touching and shorting the cell. But the lithium ions, again, very small molecule, 3 neutrons, 3 protons, and now 2 electrons, goes through and it encounters the iron phosphate, which now has electrons coming into it, increasing its negativity and allowing the lithium ion to intercalate there. And so all is right with the world. We got a battery now. We got a battery, but it's a working battery. And it's turning our motor, running our lights, our hair dryer, and our blower. We would, and all is right with the world until we have depleted the number of lithium ions in the anode, and they have migrated to the cathode and intercalated there. Now, the next time we do this after the formative charge, or there may have been 2 or 3 of these to make this happen, then we can easily extract, more easily extract even, electrons from the cathode side and pump them around onto the negative side. And so our lithium ions go back and forth, carrying charges, actually in support of the external flow of electrons. And that's how we store energy and how we release energy. They call this a rocking chair situation because it goes back and forth. The lithium ions never get into any external circuit. They just shuttle back and forth in a rocking chair type fashion. And that brings us to some of the things that you've been concerned about in the destruction of the cell. One of them occurs when overcharging the cell, and the other one occurs when over-discharging. We'll talk more about this in future episodes. Let me give you an overview at the moment. If we remove all the lithium ions here, all the lithium metal gives up its electrons, and we move all the lithium ions over to here, none of that is telling our power supply very much, because we don't have a BMS, or our BMS more typically is stupid. And so we continue to apply these charges, and we continue to try to pull off electrons off of this. Now, there's currently 2 schools of thought. The original belief was that we took electrons from the iron and caused an Fe2 or an Fe3 cation, an iron ion, to form. And that's held for a long time. Some of the more recent evidence would tend to make us believe that iron from the cathode leaches into the electrolyte, and copper from the anode does too. And so we have certain impurities in the electrolyte itself, and that's where these iron ions come from. In either case, we are electrostatically removing an electron from this side and putting it over to that side. And what happens is that those iron ions go over here just like lithium ions, and they want to intercalate into the carbon matrix too. A couple of problems with that. Iron is hugely larger than lithium ions, and it can't get through the SEI layer at all. And so it starts to build up here. And as it builds up, it forms a dendrite. A dendrite is like a kind of like a stalactite or a stalagmite. It's a buildup of a pointed structure. And so it's building a sharp little knife that grows in length in this direction. It also shows up over here from certainly the iron in the thing. It builds up on the cathode side. And so we have 2 needles growing toward each other that are really only separated by a 3 mil plastic garbage bag. If they puncture it, they short the cell, and it discharges completely through there in a kind of a violent display of current. Now you understand that all these foils are in parallel, and so that will also start to discharge all the other cells. And we can get very quickly into a thermal runaway situation that not only shorts the cell and causes high currents, but blows up our SEI layer. allowing all our lithium ions that we've stored there to suddenly begin to react with the solvents in our electrolyte, not in an orderly fashion, as in charging, and not in an orderly fashion such as discharging, but suddenly our SEI layer is breaking down and we've got an inrush of solvents into the intercalated lithium, and that goes into thermal runaway. And so normally a thermal runaway situation starts in the anode, not the cathode. And that's where the temperature starts to rise, and away we go. If nothing else, the iron plates on our SEI layer diminishing our capacity substantially. And worse, then later, if we discharge the cell, recharge the cell, now we have lithium that's blocked on the surface of the SEI layer by iron plating. And so the lithium plates onto the iron. And as that builds up, it reacts with the SEI layer, with the solvents. And so we have this massive scab growing on our cathode and diminishing our capacity. But if we do it enough where we short this cell, it will go into thermal runaway and you'll have quite a fire. And it feeds on itself. As it goes into runaway, it gets hotter, the SEI layer melts, and this thing takes off. At some point, it gets so hot that our cathode begins to dissociate oxygen out of this Fe1 atom, 6 oxygen atoms, and 4 phosphorus atoms. The phosphorus actually stabilizes this quite a bit. It's a much safer chemistry than lithium cobalt or lithium manganese oxides, which readily give up oxygen. You've got to heat this up to twice the temperature to get it to do it. Once that oxygen starts to come out, now we're feeding the whole thing. The oxygen starts to react with the electrolytes, with the rest of it, and the result can be an extremely hot fire, and we've seen the results of cars burning to the ground, primarily from overcharging. Let's talk about over-discharge and how that's all better, because it can burn your car down too. We actually recently had our first experience of an over-discharge causing a fire, and it was with an A123 battery that we over-discharged and then let sit for 6 days. And on the 6th day, it burst into flames, burnt 1.5 inches through a 2-inch maple tabletop, filled our shop with smoke, and was really quite a thermal event. And so be aware that it is now dead certain that over-discharge can also cause a thermal event. Over-discharging is a little bit different. As the charge diminishes on our cathode, or our anode side, the copper begins to oxidize. And as it oxidizes, it gives up copper ions, which are fairly smaller, and they start to precipitate out of through the carbon anode, and again start plating on the SEI layer. And that diminishes our ability to, it diminishes the capacity of our cell. This starts to occur below 1 volt. The copper begins to oxidize and so essentially dissolve and gill off copper ions into our battery cell. And that copper plating, every place that appears, reduces our ability, copper plating on that SEI layer. It builds up kind of on the inside of the SEI layer. Now the next time we go to charge the cell, our lithium can't get through there because of the copper. And so it builds up as lithium metal on the outside. And as it gets up to a certain amount of it, that starts to react with our solvents. And we have the same thermal runaway situation. And so you have to be very careful in charging again an over-discharged cell. Do it at a low current level and see what happens. What we've observed is that the voltage comes up and then it starts going back down. When it starts doing that, the temperature starts going up. Quit. You're done. That cell can't be recovered. There is no magic procedure. you've lost the cell. And so over discharge primarily is a function of copper plating on the SEI, and overcharge is primarily a function of iron dendrite growth. A lot of people talk about copper shunts being involved out here. Some, that copper plating can turn into dendrites and again puncture your separator. And if that happens, it shorts the cell. And so you have essentially the same effect on overcharge and over discharge. Overcharge tends to be a buildup of iron, and over discharge tends to be a buildup of copper. And most of this has to do with the central weakness of our lithium ionic cells, and that is the electrolyte. All electrolytes are a compromise and a kind of a mess. And it's not done in a terribly scientific way. They simply try different mixtures and see what happens. And so the electrolyte, I think, is the weak part of lithium-ion batteries, and why we have many variations of that with solid-state batteries, polymer batteries, polymer gel batteries, and so forth, is people just sort of, in an alchemist's quest to turn lead into gold, come up with some mixture that will work better in a lithium-ion cell. That's because of all the problems that come from our electrolytes. And so that should give you a little bit of an overview about the intercalation and deintercalation of the anode, the intercalation and deintercalation of the cathode after the first formative charge, which we put our lithium metal in this mixture because we can, and then turn it into cations, which they remain for the rest of the life of the battery. And give you a little bit of an overview of what happens with overcharge and over discharge, and why those are the two no-nos with lithium batteries. The effects of temperature. Increased temperatures cause a lot of these things to happen more quickly, but the biggest problem is that our electrolytes again begin to gas, and most especially the ethylene carbonate at about 90 degrees centigrade. There's some other things that happen before that, and so we say the band of 70 to 90 degrees centigrade is a bad place to be with these batteries internally, certainly externally. And you can send a battery into thermal runaway with external temperatures, but it has to be up 70 degrees centigrade. So we look at anything external to the battery above 60 degrees centigrade, 158 degrees Fahrenheit, as being bad news. As long as you're below 158 degrees Fahrenheit on your anode or on your case or so forth, you're probably not doing grave harm to the batteries. That gets you into whether the 120 or 130 degrees in the Phoenix parking lot can shorten the life of the cell. Probably not measurably, probably not in any practical sense. It certainly has an effect, but the effect would most likely be so small that you would need fairly sophisticated equipment to be able to detect it across, say, 5 years. But temperature does have an effect. We like to talk about all things with lithium batteries below 60 degrees centigrade, 158 degrees Fahrenheit. I hope that helped. Stay with us. Richard, have we missed anything?
I sat through the entire lecture, and I took notes, and I don't know that you missed anything that I was aware of.
Do you have any questions, class?
I always want to be clear. Covalence is when two of the outer bands occupy the same. The nucleuses are inside the outer bands. Is that correct?
Not precisely.
I thought that was covalence.
Covalence would be, let's say I was a solar system.
That's what okay.
And I had an electron called Pluto on my outer ring.
Okay.
And you were a solar system with a different star. And you had 7 or 8 planets. And we got so close together that Pluto got confused.
Inside and, okay.
Follow me now. And so Pluto going around me gets confused when it encounters the other one and goes around him too.
Got it. Okay.
And now he's circling the two of us.
Got it.
We are sharing a valence band electron.
I got it.
An outer valence band electron. And so, and that can be in a figure 8, it can be out in an ellipse. It's not a perfect circular shell like some of the other ones are, although they vary too. We're sharing an electron covalently. A valence band between the two
That was
of us.
close to what I I could remember from.
Now, I understand lithium ions do not bond with these crystal lattices covalently. They're simply intercalated there by charge, by proximity.
They're setting inside the openings.
Right. They're setting inside the openings in the material mechanically, and they're positioned there by the difference in charge between the crystal structure being negative and they are positive.
Okay.
So the illustration I used last week was, and you've seen these on YouTube, the levitating ball that hangs between the two magnets.
There is actually a few things on YouTube you can also associate with this teaching, and I have tried. I have done.
So that's by charge transference, it becomes part of the material, but it is not in combination with it. There's no covalency. Okay. That's kind of an important point.
Yes, that was something I wanted to understand. And then everything else covered it because the movement of the free electrons was very clear and easy to understand.
Okay, good. Test questions.
Okay.
What happens when you overcharge your cell?
It creates a iron something with a D, like a stalagmite, and the other side creates the same thing. And if those two touch, it goes boom.
It shorted the battery.
Bad, yeah.
Eventually, from either side, they will pierce.
They pierce the plastic.
The separator, and that's bad. What happens in an over-discharge situation?
Over discharge, a similar effect occurs, except it's with the copper.
That's right.
And the copper builds up.
Copper oxidizes and starts plating on the
plates on the outside.
SCI.
And then if it breaks, basically they're in. I always describe it as plastic bag. So if it breaks the plastic bag, either through an overcharge or an undercharge, and it contacts the other,
it's bad news.
Bad news. You have cross current.
Now, short of bad news, you'll have capacity loss. At bad news, you're not worried about capacity loss. You're worried about the fire
or cell loss. Yeah.
Right. And so that's don't overcharge, don't over-discharge. How do we keep from over-discharge? We bottom balance the cells. And here was a point that I brought out on a blog, and it's just not occurred to me to do on video. When you're charging, you're artificially holding the voltage up. And so you are up the steep side of the slope, but if you let it go, it falls back down. And so you're kind of perched there trying to do things while you have diffusion going on. That's top charging. Bottom charging offers another serious advantage. We can discharge the cell to where it's on the vertical slope of the discharge curve and stop.
Yep.
And we can let it sit for a day. And we can actually measure where it is in state of charge, because on the vertical slope, our state of charge will vary largely from small changes in voltage.
Okay.
Up on the flat part, it doesn't vary very much in voltage, or even large changes in state of charge. So we have the two ends. What's the difference between two ends? This one we are climbing artificially. We're pumping current into the battery, and it's diffusing while we're doing that. We have a very interactive thing going on here, right? And when we let it go, it starts to plunge back down to open circuit voltage. On the discharge side, it's static. We can simply stop the discharge, and it'll wander around a little bit, and it'll settle fairly quickly to a voltage. And we can adjust, put in little bits of current, take out little bits of current, and change that voltage, which represents this point of state of charge. And so that's the primary advantage, of course, is when the battery runs out.
It stops before it goes to the bottom.
It kind of, all the cells go down at the same time. And so you can't have one set of cells damaging another. At the top, we don't care. At the bottom, we could be discharging at 1,000 amps. Charging is going to be 15 amps, 200 amps in a fast charge situation. And so, but the curious difference that I never really articulated is that we're not really there on the top balance thing. There's a lot of other stuff going on.
Exactly.
Thermals and diffusion and
it's a current.
It's a dynamic situation, and we're using a fake recipe to get it to a place we can't see or measure. And then we have to let it go, and a day later see what it did. And so discharge is different. We can discharge to 2.5 volts, let it go, it'll climb back up to about 2.75, 2.80, and that's where I trim it. And then just a little bit of resistance, I can leak out a little current or add a little current in and change that voltage where they're all the same. And because they're on the vertical face, small changes in voltage indicate large changes in state of charge. And so that's the bottom balancing gig.
Which I'm thoroughly on board with now.
It works. And actually, Jack Rickard did not invent this, guys. DeWalt, power tool company, has a patent on a bottom balancing charger for the power tools. I mean, this is not a contrived, I just came up with this out of the blue. We've had to kind of relearn it and how useful it is for electric cars. They use a lot of lithium. And in fact, they use a lot of lithium iron phosphate.
Yes. So they would know.
And so, well, that's the appeal to authority no longer works with me. It's show me. I'm from Missouri.
We're from Missouri. It is the show me state.
I think that's a pretty good show, don't you?
That is a very good show. And I got...
Is there anything else we need? We're forgetting something important. What is it?
Well, I did talk with Gil quite a bit about why the C-Max Hybrid was selling so well.
What'd you say?
He said it had a good price point. It's around $33,745.
I heard they were selling them at around 25.
Well, that's a very good price point.
And that was why they were competing with Toyota.
This was listed in a press release, probably a little dated, but a plug-in hybrid, which is
we're gonna have to start keeping an eye on Ford because I thought they would do something, but they've been kind of slow coming in. We'll see how that goes. So we're going to continue to monitor the true what we can divine as the true state of the automakers' efforts on electric cars, and we're going to continue to explore how you can get better and newer stuff to make your own electric